How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. I make music as AfroDJMac, and this is the show where we talk about all things making music and anything related and tangents that go along with it. Before we get started on today's episode, I just want to send a shout out and thanks to Scott of Redactive Audio. His website's facebook.com/redactive audio. And Scott has helped me out a little bit with cleaning up some audio files for this podcast. Sometimes you record an hour-and-a-half podcast and you listen back and you find some issues with the sound files. Scott has managed to help me clean up some of these audio files, and I really do appreciate that because it has saved the podcast from going right to the trash. So check out Redactive Audio, facebook.com/redactive audio. Today I'm pretty excited to have a chance to speak with Peter Nyboer. Peter works for Sensel, and they've got a really cool device called the Morph, which I'm going to let him tell us about in just a minute. But yes, hello, welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for all the stuff you guys are doing is really cool with Sensel and Morph, and I think this is an interesting step in a cool direction.
I agree. I mean, that's kind of why I'm working with them, because it's a super cool device. For the listeners out there who aren't familiar with it, the Morph is really at its core just a pressure pad. So it's a pressure sensor with about 20,000 small pressure sensors in it. The device itself is about the size of a small iPad and pretty thin. It's really only about the thickness of a PCB. It's got an aluminum case and then like a plastic over top of the pressure sensor. So now it senses pressure and it senses multiple touches, but what we do with that is we have these different silicone rubber overlays that you can put on top of it, and it identifies the overlay with a series of magnets that gives it an identity. The firmware recognizes the overlay and it turns into whatever you put on top of it. So we have overlays for video editing, for music production, for piano keyboard, of course for typing. And then because it's so like simple to just sort of like, once you have a typing overlay, we'll just put different screens on it. So you can do Dvorak, you can do Azerty, as well as your standard QWERTY layouts. We have overlays for gaming. We have overlays for making your own overlay. So it's this really kind of deep device, and it's really intriguing because, it's like, oh, well, this hardware has like all the flexibility of a touch screen, but you have the really super sensitive pressure sensing. So you get great velocity control, and you also have like actual tactile pieces that you're working with rather than just touching glass. So that's kind of a quick overview of what's going on with the Sensel Morph.
Yeah, it's a really cool device, and it's got like you said, it looks a lot like the size of like maybe an iPad Mini, and it's what it has that the iPad doesn't have is like that feeling of like I'm actually touching something. So I love like the versatility of the iPad. You can make it be whatever you want. Everyone's got, well, not everyone, but like all the apps that come out are like really interesting in that it's totally different every time. But the thing is, it always feels like you're just touching a piece of glass.
Well, that's because you are.
You are, right? And even though
Yeah.
no matter what you're doing, it's the same feeling. And what you guys managed to do was take this idea of the, I guess, like changeability, morphability maybe, of the interface can change all the time, just like on an iPad, but it's these really nice, you said they're made of silicone or rubber type of thing?
Yeah.
And it changes the layout of the device, and you can feel what you're touching again.
Yeah, I know. That's it's like. It's this weird thing. It's like suddenly like software is hardware, and it's kind of like the stuff in your screen now is like you can just pull it out and put it on your desktop. So yeah, it kind of has like this best of both worlds approach to it. It's funny because what I've been doing with the Morph is a lot of what my position is at Sensel is just sort of like trying to explain the product as well as help them sort of understand particularly the music products industry and people who are music producers and making music, people who work with music software, and make it so that the Morph, works well for them, and it is
Mm.
kind of a seamless experience. So I've been doing a lot of just sort of like background, sort of technical stuff, giving them like, okay, well, here's a white paper kind of thing that describes like the stuff that people will expect this to do. I came on board with them about a year ago when they were just starting to fulfill all their Kickstarter orders, and they were in that sort of like very difficult space that a
Mm.
lot of Kickstarter products experience, which is going from, Kickstarter hit to actual product that, needs to accommodate a real customer.
Yeah, I'm
Because the
actually in the middle
Kickstarter,
of a few of those. I have a
yeah,
couple things I've supported, and it's like another update, another setback, another this. It does sometimes
it's
take a long time.
I've been involved in 3 different Kickstarters. Well, actually, I guess kind of 4, with different companies. And yeah, there's always just like that. Okay, the elation, the excitement, and then you get it all done, and it's like, okay, now who's going to buy this? To make it a sustainable thing. And you see that it's a huge problem with a lot of Kickstarter products out there. And so that's what I'm helping them. I initially tried to help them navigate that, and now we're actually a real product, and we have inventory, and
Hmm.
we have a product strategy going forward. So yeah, it's pretty gratifying to watch it grow and watch it become a thing that people experience.
Yeah, it is. It's nice when it works out, right? And it doesn't just become this like vaporware type thing that never can really come into fruition, even though the goals have been met of the campaign.
Yeah, yeah, or even if it's like a super cool product, because a lot of
Yeah.
times, like, what people want from Kickstarter is different from what people want from when they go to a website or go to a store and buy a product that same day. So yeah, um, trying to maintain the hopes and dreams.
Yeah. Well, I think that's like something that happens with Kickstarters. It's sort of like you're in it a little more from the beginning. I think there's like a sort of investment that you feel. Like I said, there are a couple things that I supported. One of them is like a couple years old now, and I'm still rooting for them. I'm still like, okay, like I'm not gonna like cancel my, they offer that every time. Like you can cancel your,
Right.
contribution, but it's like, nah, I want to see you guys make it. There,
Yeah.
whereas like if it's an already established thing, you sort of expect a certain amount of like timeliness and um, customer service or whatever. But when you see it like coming from the ground up like that, it's an interesting mind frame change that happens in the customer.
Yes, very much so.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so that's kind of, yeah, like I said, that's what I've been doing, is just kind of like a lot of communications and sort of technical strategy, product strategy. It's a pretty great place for me to be, because I've done a lot of like in the past. So I helped found Livid Instruments, which was we made MIDI controllers, and that was about 14 years ago. And so that as as one of the co-founders and one of the principals in that company, it was just a lot of different hats I had to wear, and trying to figure things out as we moved from you know being just like a company that did video products made out of like off the shelf products, sort of like DIY
Mm.
type of stuff, to a company that had like global distribution and was selling in retail, and serving the music market primarily instead of video. Um, and that, working with that company, it was like I got like a full breadth of like what's involved in products, and what I want to see from music products. I came from a kind of an experimentalist's background. I started working with Max MSP in like 1992, I guess it was 92, I guess, yeah, at UC Santa Cruz, and just kind of got the bug there, because it was like, oh, I could make these things, I could make music in these ways that were just, you know, that's sort of like all the frustration I had with playing guitar as a teenager.
Uh-huh.
It's like now it's like, oh, there's all the sophistication with like, with MIDI and computers and sequencing and Max MSP, or MSP didn't exist yet.
Mhm.
That was still like 4 years away from then. And just sort of like evolving with that and understanding like what music could be, what I wanted from music, and then actually trying to realize just pieces of that, uh, was just always just constantly engaging to me. and then working with Livid, it was like, okay, well now we actually have like we can put some of these ideas into real products, that people can buy on the shelf instead of just something that I, kind of imagine in my own little, like in my spare time or whatever, or, in my independent projects. So it's super exciting to be able to see some of those things come to fruition and, understand like, oh wait, that weird idea I had about music is actually a terrible idea, or be like, oh wait, this idea I had, was actually kind of interesting, and there's a future in it. So it's always kind of interesting to navigate that sort of experimentalist versus like, off the shelf kind of ideas.
Yeah, if I remember, I think Livid has some like customizable aspects to what they were doing too, with the devices. And I always thought the design was great. There was really nice looking stuff, and it seemed like a very musician-minded construction behind it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that
Yeah.
was very much what we were going for, was being inspired by musical instruments, trying to be open. We didn't have our own software that we needed to push. It was like, well, we have this controller, and we always had our roots in like video performance and video, live video mixing. And so we were always like thinking about that, and we're like, well, how can we make it so that the really creative person who is interested in all of these like different medias, that the computer suddenly affords us, how can we give them a way to like access this stuff with their hands in a way that it is musical and immediate and real time. And we didn't want to just sort of like, we didn't want to have a button that said, do this.
Right.
We wanted to have buttons that, could open up worlds.
Yeah, there's that customizable aspect to it. It's not really force feeding you a certain workflow.
Right. And in sort of retrospect, it's like, well, that workflow thing has worked out very well for some, right? For like Ableton and Native Instruments, that whole sort of idea of providing a workflow that is rich, but still very much a workflow. Definitely is it very well. It works out quite well in the marketplace. That is for sure. And I think people, are really engaged by it, and producing some really great music out of it. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I did a Ableton Live pack with Livid. I think there was actually two, where they sent me some samples from the factory, and I turned those into like percussive instruments and also melodic instruments. Some of the machines that were there made some really cool noises with some like tones in there that I was able to turn into like synthesizer type instruments.
Oh, that was you, because I remember somebody did that.
Yeah.
I remember, because we had, that was one of the things that we did at Livid, was like we did a lot of our own manufacturing. And that was kind of like one of our conceits was, and that was not an aspect I was particularly involved in. I was more of a cheerleader in that respect. But it made sense, because we really, wanted to design unique things, and we needed to have that sort of in-house control. It was also kind of a way to build the company organically too. Rather than being completely tied to sort of like global manufacturing concerns. It's like we had a lot of control over what we were doing, and we could experiment with different ideas, and we could also, like, one of the things we did was do a lot of like cool like custom bodies and things like that. So somebody would be like, I want one in bright green, and I want my logo on it. We'd be like, okay, we can do that. And so we were offering lots of interesting woods and color schemes and things like that for a while. And it was pretty exciting to be able to offer that, direct to a consumer. It's like, it was very much a product of its time.
Yeah, I saw a lot of that kind of pop up on YouTube videos every once in a while. Someone would have a Livid controller that either lit up a certain way or had a certain look or finish to it, which was like, their own unique thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
it's
I
all
think
all
that's
about it's all about
yeah.
like
Go
that
ahead.
sort of like we were very much inspired by the guitar, and guitars very much have that. People get very attached to their electric guitars, and it's like these are industrial appliances in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
but just the different finish of the wood, the very different feelings that people get from different woods on the neck, and there's just so many little subtle things that go into these sort of industrial products that we were like I think we can do that too, and even though it's like our products are even more industrial than a electric guitar.
Yeah. Yeah, I always kind of liked that customization. I had like when I got my first the APC 40, like the first one they came out with, I took it apart and spray painted it so it had its own look. Like I didn't want it to I wanted my live setup to kind of look like this customized spaceship thing, that was like no one else had. So I did that with a lot of my controllers that were like pretty easy to disassemble and just spray painted them a bunch of different colors.
Oh, that's
Um,
super fun.
yeah, to give it that like personalized thing. It's not like, just this like one product. It created like a little bit more of a mystery, I felt, at least in my own head, of the product. And I kind of liked actually with the APC 40, it took away a lot of the writing and the labeling for each knob so that I would make them my own without like being, oh, this is send A all the time. This is send B. This is pan. I
Right.
would remap them and then not have to think about that, which is kind of fun for me.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you should have just bought an RGB.
Right.
All right.
And it's funny, like with guitar, how you say they are like very like industrialized, produced in big factories a lot of times. But the fact, like you said, like each one is its own piece of wood, and it's sort of like a living thing in a lot of ways. I mean, I've played like off the shelf at stores, like certain guitars, a Fender Stratocaster, on this shelf is really great. And then the one next to it just doesn't feel the same. There's like a
Uh-huh.
different vibe. And the Squire might actually feel a little bit better in some cases, just
Right.
depending on almost like which piece of wood that guitar happened to be made out of.
Yeah, it's funny. I bought a bass guitar a few years ago and just got it on Craigslist, and it was like it wasn't something that I felt like I wanted to take seriously. I didn't want to invest a bunch of money in a fancy guitar. It's like I just want to find a cheap bass and start like playing around on it. Because
Right.
I played some guitar and I was like attracted to the bass, and I was like, it would be nice to be able to just like produce some bass sounds and sample them or whatever. And so I found some dude on Craigslist and bought a budget Yamaha bass for like $80. And the
Mhm.
thing is, it's like I love it. It's like I'll go to NAMM and I'll try like these super crazy fancy basses, and I'm just like, I'm like, I kind of like this one. I kind of like my
Yeah.
cheap $80 bass, and I've never felt like it produces good tones and it plays well for me. And it's just amazing. Like it's not really it's about what fits you and like what your
Mm.
sort of experience is and what your background is, and and like for me it's just like that bass, it's all I want.
Hmm.
you know
That's great.
yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen expensive guitars. People have expensive guitars, and they just over time, sometimes even like they don't like live a good life. And it's probably a lot to do with how they're treated.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes you get lucky. You just got a good one.
Right, I
I, th-
know. I know it
I
stays in tune. Like how is that possible for
mhm.
$80?
Yeah, I always think it's so important to actually play the instrument before you buy it. You like buying a guitar over eBay or Craigslist to me is like, oh, just so nerve wracking that
Yes.
I,
Yeah.
I know like it's the standard American whatever edition, but there's no standardization in a lot of ways
Yeah.
with them. So that's
Right.
cool.
But it is kind
Good
of funny
luck.
because that is sort of like, to sort of like bring it back, like that is like a challenge we have at Sensel with the Morph, is that it is like this hardware product and we're only selling it online.
Mhm.
It's a small company and it's a brand new technology, and it's like the ability to just like flood, a global distribution retail situation is just like not what we're doing with this. And it is a big challenge because really the main like premise of this thing is how it feels. Like
Yeah.
that is really, it's like there's obvious selling points of like it's super portable and all of that type of stuff, but it's like when it comes down to it, it's like people see it online, it's like I don't think they're ready to take it seriously because it's like it's colorful, but then like we'll take it out to shows and trade shows and things like that, or events, and people try it and are like, whoa, wait a minute, no, this thing is real and it feels good, and so it's like that challenge of like that direct to consumer, like I think people like definitely do want to touch it and they should, but I'm glad some people are taking the chance, but also some people have like tried it out too. We've managed to get it to a number of events around the world, so there is like that trust that's getting built. And yeah, because it's like I wouldn't personally, I don't know if I would buy it without being able to try it out. It's just
Right.
it's hardware. That's this thing's gonna touch I'm gonna be touching this thing. I want to touch. That's the
Yeah.
whole point.
Yeah, it's
So
like it's very much something you got to feel to understand exactly how it works. It's like
yeah,
trying on a pair of shoes. I always buy my shoes online. I wear a size 13. They're really hard to find in the store. So it's like another thing, like, like your shoe, like you really got to feel it to know if
right.
you like it. And this is that exact kind of thing. Like you have to feel it. And, up until I had one in front of me, I was kind of like, well, let's see how this is going to work. I could see how having it just, on a display model at like, your local music shop would really be a big help, but that's a much different story.
Yeah, for sure.
It's built beautifully. I mean, even right down to the packaging and everything. It's got a little bit of like I would say almost like a Apple vibe, like in like the sleekness of it in the packaging. It's very clean, and it's when you pick it up, it's got a little. It's not heavy, but it's got like just enough weight where you feel like it's built nicely.
Right, right.
If you know what I mean. Like it doesn't feel flimsy. It's I guess that's like an aluminum type of thing,
Yes,
right?
and yeah, it's an aluminum enclosure. Yeah, no, it's solidly built. That's for sure. It's funny because it's like the whole pressure sensor thing with that's actually how I kind of like that's how I came to them. Initially I met the founders like when they were just starting up. I go to, since I live in the Bay Area, I'm kind of in the heart of the Silicon Valley. I like to go to different like sort of meetups and just check out what's going on, because in particular there's this hardware meetup that happens fairly regularly, and it's just funny because I'm always just kind of blown away at like the quality of things people are doing there. And these are
Mhm.
all just like, for the most part, nobody there at this meetup is established. They're all pretty much in startups, looking for funding or have some sort of seed funding for their project. And people give presentations, and there's usually like investors and stuff around. And it's mostly just like a way for people to like support each other and talk about like the challenges of doing hardware. So with Livid, we had just come out with our first pressure sensor, the bass, and I think this was actually the time when we first did the guitar wing, which was
Mm.
really just it's kind of funny, it's kind of a precursor to what the Morph is doing. It was really it's just a pressure sensor underneath it. And the guitar wing has, like a slider, and it has some buttons, and it has some like little touch pads and things like that. Even the things that are buttons, for digital, like on and off, those are firing on, not on a PCB, but on a pressure sensor. And so we just kind of interpret the pressure sensor on that. And it was definitely like a different way of manufacturing these products compared to a lot of other products out there. So it was, I went to this meetup and just showed it to people, did like the 2-minute sort of like, here's the guitar wing, here's what it does, here's its deal. And I just started talking to one of the founders of Sensel, Ilya, and he's like, "Oh, well, yeah, we do pressure sensor." And I was like, "Oh, tell me more,"
Mm.
And so I met up with them, and we were looking like, well, is this something that we could integrate into what we were doing with Livid? And it just wasn't like the right time for either of us to do that, and because they were just starting to develop the technology and just starting to develop the Morph, which it turns out wasn't shipped for like another 3 years. So.
Mhm.
But it was just definitely one of those interesting conversations that came from like, uh, sort of like a manufacturing perspective, but ends up having very real impact in like, for the artist and um, the creative process, so it's just kind of like, I don't know. That's one of those things that I'm always fascinated by. Like, how do we accommodate like global supply chains and then, actually, being something that's useful for somebody with weird ideas?
Yeah, that was something I kind of wanted to ask you about a little bit. I mean, in this day and age, technology changes so quickly. There's a new this or that and everything, and hardware is, to me, such like a risky, like turbulent place to be. Everything I do is all software based,
Yeah.
right? So it's really easy that way. There's very minimal upfront like cost, and
Hmm.
there's no manufacturing. It's just a file, really. It's
Right.
everything I do. Um, so the hardware game has got to be like really exciting and scary and all that, because I mean you're working with like the very new technology of the pressure sensor, right?
Yeah.
Um, how do you guys manage that? How do you you've done a really nice job in doing something that feels very new right now, and like it's going to still feel new for a while.
Yeah.
I guess like how do you manage that? Is there like a long-term vision, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. I
not
think
asking a
so.
great question.
I mean, in general, like, I can speak to just part of like the fascination of hardware. Like,
Mhm.
I think part of the satisfaction of, like for someone who is sort of on the fence, like who has some ideas about starting a company or starting a project or something like that. And they're like, well, do I do this in software or do I do this in hardware? And I don't know. I mean, there's so much, expression is so like tied to a body. Um, and, and uh, I think there's just a lot of like great opportunities for just sort of fascination and um expression with hardware. And I think
Yeah.
that's a real drive as far as like, okay, it is actually, in some ways it's a bigger pain in the butt than software, um and can be more complicated to scale, but it's just ends up being so much more satisfying, I think.
Mm.
Even, I guess I've always sort of hedged by being in the controller game, right?
Yeah. Right.
Because it's like, well, okay, I'm not going to like, because when you're doing something that's either like uh, a hardware controller with a synthesizer, like for example, the Novation circuit is a good example of that. Um, but there's tons of examples that where it's like, okay, you're actually kind of in both games because there's a lot of software and DSP development that has to go in to the actual, the actual sound engine. So just doing the controller thing, it's like, okay, we only have to worry about sensing, we only have to worry about creating control messages. And then as far as like what makes the sound, it's like, well, there's plenty of other people dealing with that for the computer and for the mobile devices. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think, with hardware, there is definitely a love of the game for it, that I think draws people into it. That, it's not just about dollars and cents. It's about like, literally connecting with people and, e- experiencing like the sort of new challenges of, putting things together and how do you have a lifespan with this stuff. It's part of the natural attraction
Yeah.
to it, even though if it maybe doesn't, make sense on a rational level in a lot of ways. There's,
Right.
I think there's so, and that's also what's cool about the music products is that there's like so many interesting devices out there that are coming up. Like, I'm always amazed. Like the one that I've been really impressed by is the Mod Devices, which is like sort of a flexible guitar pedal. Um, it's essentially a small embedded Linux computer with audio inputs and outputs and a small screen. And you can load different PD patches on it. You can load DSP plugins. Um, and you can, design your own interface all through. Essentially, it's a small web server too, so it delivers, an interface to your mobile device or to your computer through a browser. And it's funny because it's that product is something I had been thinking about a lot. I spent some time at an embedded company called Nextthing, and I'd always been like, oh, it'd be really great to be able to have like, this sort of like ecosystem centered around this small computer that looks like a large guitar pedal, but is actually like this really sophisticated device. And getting some understanding of what it takes to make a device like that, and then see it actually completed as well as that Mod Devices has done. It's just like, oh my god, there's a lot of love in this game because this is not something
Yeah.
this is not a get rich quick scheme.
Right. Yeah.
This is not selling insurance. This is not this is not a pyramid. This is a very real thing.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm like kind of where my question was in this, like there's a lot of commitment really in like, all right, we're making hardware, it's fixed, it's this thing now,
Yeah.
and yeah, the mod devices I've seen, and it's really awesome, but they've got the software kind of behind it, which is nice too.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's something as a guitar player I'm kind of like, ooh, that looks kind of neat.
Yeah, it really does. But it's also it's not just the thing is it's not just a guitar pedal. It's
Yeah.
like you can plug in a MIDI controller to it.
Mhm.
And you can load up their, Juno synth emulator. And it's like, oh, now you have like this, you have a synthesizer and you just plug in, a USB MIDI controller and it's really something else. It's really an astonishing product to me in that regards, because it's really this like, it is that mix of hardware and software where you have both that sort of like, I can change anything anytime magic of software, which is of course kind of the curse of software. Plus that sort of that sort of reliability and solidity of hardware.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. There's just a certain satisfaction of turning a knob that you just don't get, when you click on a knob on a screen and then scroll your mouse up and down.
Yeah,
It's just not the same. There's that connection is, distant.
yeah. It's like, that's like, I guess that Eurorack thing, people talk about that same thing,
Mm.
building out like, really big Eurorack systems that just sort of do all that stuff. I personally, I have a very small Eurorack and I like to integrate it with software. So again, it's like the kind of like I hedge.
Yeah,
It's
right.
like, okay, I don't need to be able to run 8 tracks of, of composition on, my hardware system. I'm like, I'll just do one at a time and multi-track it and,
Mhm.
add some effects in software. And it's like, kind of like, balance the portfolio in that regards.
Yeah. Yeah, the Euro rack world is definitely trying to recruit me, I think. I literally
Yes.
got a call from Sweetwater. They have like, they give you the call once in a while.
Oh,
If
okay.
you ever did that, and they were like just letting me know that they're really expanding their Euro rack system. I'm like, oh, thank you. like, like the stores are calling me now.
Yeah,
For,
I finally took the plunge and I did it in the most like, in the smallest possible way. Like what happened is like, so we showed the Morph at Super Booth.
Mhm.
And I Super Booth is basically an analog synthesizer trade show. It happens in Germany once a year. And it's really fantastic. It's a great community of people. And it's just, again, it's that hardware. It's really there's so much small scale hardware stuff going on there that is
Yeah.
just, it's unreal. I the amount of creativity that goes into all these fringe players. It's like, how many different ways can you make an oscillator? And it's like, the answer is
A
a
lot.
lot. How many different ways can you make a sine wave? And and what you can do with that sine wave. It's endlessly fascinating. And anyway, so taking the Morph there is like, it's almost anathema, right? You have like this hardware device that is trying very hard to minimize its existence and only give you the very essential hardware pieces that you need, which is great for portability, but maybe not so great for the mentality of the super booth fetish, of the analog synthesizer fetish that that is very attractive. So I was just like, okay, so I think what I need to do is I need to make a small system. And so I did it. I got the smallest possible rack you can get, which is 42 HP. A really nice. I'll throw in a plug for Erica Synths. It's their Pico case. So it has power, and it's 42 HP. And I was like, okay, that's all I'm gonna do. And I spent all this time on I guess it's Modular Grid, which is again like the most amazing site. Like it has pretty much every Euro rack module in it, and you can sort of develop a virtual, just start putting together your modules.
It, right?
Yeah, and again, it's like this is not. It's not. It doesn't seem to me like it really is, but it's really great because you're like, oh, I need an ADSR that has these features that is only this wide, and you can do it, and you can start to save your different designs and share them with people like your Eurorack friends who know more about this stuff. And you're like, is this a good filter? And so I put it together using that. And I designed it around the Snyderphonics Mantamate, which I could plug the Morph into, and it just reads it as a USB, USB class compliant device. And the cool thing about the Mantamate is it has basically like sort of 12 CV outs that you can generate from MIDI. It's MPE compatible, so you can actually do MPE stuff on your controller just through the Mantamate and have it turned into CV. And then just use that. So it's sort of like, instead of having to dedicate, a whole rack to modulators, it's like I have a bunch of modulators in my hand, and I'm going to use MPE as like these, these weird pressure and location signals that I can then, use to manipulate the sound. And then it's just have like an oscillator, a couple envelopes, a filter or two. I have 2 filters and VCA, and then just output that into software. But it was great because it was a good hook for Super Booth, and for showing that, like, for showing the Morph in again, the minimal hardware and the maximal hardware environment. So that was my very like small scale Eurorack indulgence, but it's kind of enough right now. Like,
yeah,
I don't need to go Richard Devine on this stuff.
Yeah, right. Well, that's cool. I mean, I could see how that would fit in nicely with Morph too.
Yeah. And software too, like, because the Mantamate also takes USB MIDI from your computer, and then you can just like modulate stuff, from your computer, and get a lot of that great analog stuff, and then just take that into your DAW and do what you will. So yeah, you don't have to go crazy. That's the moral of the story. Right. With Eurorack, you don't have to. Just a little discipline,
little restraint. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, look at my sample folder, my preset folder. You'll realize I don't have much of that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What I think is cool about Morph is how it is sort of straddling like both worlds really nicely, the software and the hardware world. I was really surprised when I got it and I was playing around with it, especially inside the editor, how all the pressure sensitivity works, and it is really sensitive, it's really responsive, and you can make it do so many different things.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing that's like, it's a challenge, from, like, I'm sort of, majority of my time is sort of as a marketing and communications person. And it's like, who is the buyer for this? Because there's so many different buyers that it can be used for, right? Because we have like the video editor overlay. And there is sort of like this, if you were to do some sort of like, marketing discovery session at at Essalon or something, you would find this customer who is this shining beacon of creativity, who who exists out there in the internet world, that is this multifaceted multimedia like creative person that does video editing, that does like blogging and writing, that is works, comfortably from the shores of Nayarit, Mexico, as well as sometimes fishing in Alaska. And they want to play piano, and they want to edit videos, and they want to write novels or whatever. And so it's like this sort of like uber creative that really exists in this sort of modern world. But there's maybe like 5 of those people, so so it's like from a marketing perspective, you could be sort of aspirational and try to make everybody think they're that person.
Right.
We're
That would be a great commercial, by the way. A nice video of the fisherman.
We're not quite so I don't know quite what the word is. I can't say that the company's not ambitious, but in terms of like, I don't know, trying to reprogram minds like that, I don't have that in me. I'm sure there are people who do. I'm a little bit more straightforward, and so I've definitely been focusing a lot on the sort of like the music uses of it, and but again, it's like that's just such a small portion of what's possible with it. There's also the API where you can just like take in 16 multiple, you can take in up to 16 touches on the pressure pad itself and just use it as raw controller information. And so you can do all sorts of crazy things with that. There's also the overlay designer where you can sort of make your own overlays. And those overlays could be, they could be used for, direct expression with music, or they could be something really boring. Like I just want, all my DAW commands, all my macros laid out on this thing, so I can just quickly access the stuff that I need as like a super typewriter, without having to do like weird things with your hand to do command control, letter key command. It's
I was playing with that a little bit myself.
Yeah.
Because like the way I kind of like to work when I'm doing like my instruments, I have like I've got like my push, I got my computer to a little bit to the right, the push is sort of centered, and using the morph on the left hand, so I've got like kind of my hands spread out with, now the push is sort of in between, so I could go right to it, but I can kind of use my trackpad and then like hold down alt with the one hand, and then just do the clicking and little things like that. Duplicate is a button now. It's not like a key command that I got to do on my keyboard, and it's nice. I mean, I think I need a little more practice with it, and just as I learn like what I need, but I can see that being like a really helpful approach to just like kind of after a while you have like all these different commands that you're going to do. I'm duplicating time, I'm deleting, I'm renaming, clicking for this little button here for that.
Yeah. And even just for like live performance, it's like, it's like there's a lot of times where you're just like, I need to make sure that I am in this particular place, and that can either come from you getting just good at like, okay, I'm just gonna use my keyboard and trackpad in the middle of the show, which some people do. A lot of people are trying to move away from that. Or you can just come up with several key commands and attach them to one button and just press that button and then know you're there. So it is kind of funny because like you can sort of like it has all this great pressure sensitivity and awesome possibility for doing weird music stuff, but it's like it can also be an extremely practical industrial device. So it's like, is it a productivity device? Is it for creative expression? Is it for researchers who want to do machine learning on human gesture? Like it's all that stuff, but like you can't. It's funny, like from just sort of marketing, like you have to make decisions, and I don't want to. I want all these people to engage with it. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and then you can see like on the site, there's definitely a lot of different angles, different types of creatives that are being I guess satisfied or targeted with this device, which is pretty cool. Like we're kind of more in the music world, I guess, but yeah, it is. It's reaching a lot of areas. Even video games, there's a video game controller overlay, which is interesting.
Yeah. And then again, that's I think a little bit more for like development and ideas. It's not I mean, you could definitely just hook it up to your Xbox and go to town. But I think that, you know, the purpose-built devices are probably in most cases, going to be more satisfying than working with the Morph. In that
What I like
regards.
about the editor is like you can like change anything you can to a key command of any. There's I'm looking at it right now. There's you can do MIDI notes, CC. You could do just regular keyboards, like
Right.
letters on your keyboard, which is really
Yeah.
cool because in the past, like if I wanted to do something with my APC 40, for instance, I have to convert the MIDI using something like Bohm's MIDI translator or and one of those different. It's another piece of software. It's another thing in the middle that really kind of prevented me from ever doing it much.
Yes. Yeah, it's like it's just weird how those little barriers exist that, you know, keep you from like, it's just too much hassle. And it's like, what do you mean? It's a supercomputer. It's not that, you know, it's like, it is kind of a hassle because you forget to do it, or you just end up in that sort of like technical mind frame that a lot of times pulls you out of, you know, the creative mind frame, and you just want to sit down and just have things work and do them. You know, again, sort of back to that hardware appeal. I think that's part of the appeal for, like, you know, for me, like playing guitar and analog synths to, not in my personal life, is to a lesser degree for sure, but it is definitely like, it's very satisfying to just fire it up and just go.
Yeah.
And no one, you know, it's not like you're going to be tempted to check your email on your guitar. And you're not going to get an alert that tells you that, you know,
right,
you've got a meeting, so you can play your guitar and miss your meeting. So
it's so true though. Like I'm trying to more and more. I mean, even like little things like just go full screen on whatever app I'm using on the computer, like if it's live, just to kind of hide all that other stuff, turn off the Wi-Fi even, because it's like it's a portal of distraction.
Yes,
it can really just suck you in at a moment's notice, and it happens to me so often where I might be inside working on the computer and I get some like side thought to do something on the internet. Maybe I'm just looking for a quick like answer about how to do this or that, and next thing you know, I'm watching like videos of animals pushing each other off cliffs, and like what am I doing? I only had like an hour or two to work on music, and now look at me, you know.
Yeah, it is funny. Like, so last night I was checking out some stuff I'll just skip the details, but I was watching this video of Steve Jobs from like 1982 or something like that, and he was talking about I think it might even been older, and he was talking about like sort of what was next for Apple at the time. And, you know, he was talking about how, you know, the power of personal computing, and like how, you know, it's important that, you know, to make this difference of like having one computer for one person versus like this sort of, you know, the mainframe topology that was sort of dominant, that was dominant at the time. And he talked about like, I hate that I'm talking about Steve Jobs and technology. It's just, I feel like a cliche. But
that's the reason why they're cliches sometimes. Right?
I know it's a touchstone, I guess, but
it makes you feel any better. I always show my high school seniors his commencement speech, 2005, Stanford, I think it was. You know, that's maybe a little bit played out in the world, but it's so good. I mean, it gets that attention for a reason.
Right. But anyway, so it's like he was talking about just, you know, how computers today, how computers today are, you know, like it's this problem-solving device that creates a problem. And what Apple was going to do was, instead of, you know, he's like, just the computing power, the ability for computers to run computing has expanded exponentially, and they've gotten so powerful that Apple was going to take all of that additional power, and instead of applying it to VisiCalc, so VisiCalc could run itself, you know, because he's like, people say VisiCalc, it's fine, I don't need more. And he says, you know, he's like, well, we're not going to apply the additional computing power to VisiCalc. We're going
what's
to apply
VisiCalc?
VisiCalc was like, that was the I guess it was a spreadsheet that ran on the Apple computers in the late 70s and early 80s. That was the killer app.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the killer app that made it. an actual like a thing for people that they had to have. Um, so instead of, making it so that VisiCalc could run better, they were going to make it so the computers could be easier to use, so that you could pull it out of the box, set it up, and you didn't have to know how to use a computer to use it. You would, and so it's just kind of funny. It's like, okay, well, that was then, and like Macintosh did do that, right? They made computers easier to use, and so that the computer could actually solve problems instead of being another problem.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we've come full circle, right? Because it's like now computers are a problem, and and now we need to solve the problem of the computer. So we have analog synths and guitars and hardware devices and hardware sequencers and things like that.
That's funny. That's actually why I went to a Mac, because I didn't want to have the computer be in the way of me using the computer.
Right.
That was like, I don't know, 2005 or so when I finally got a laptop for myself. But that was the big draw. But now that ease of use is what makes it so distracting, and it gets in the way of what you're doing, because everything's so easy to just jump to. Oh, I need information. It's a click away. I need this. I want to try this out, and everything is a little too easy.
Right. And it's funny because like I started working on an album about 2 years ago, and it was definitely a period of transition for me, when Livid sort of like had constricted, and I couldn't be a part of that company really anymore, and then I had gone on to work with another startup called Next Thing, and I was doing embedded computing for a while, and then they had major like financial issues, and a bunch of us got laid off, and so I was in this point, and I was like, well, I got to start. I had started a little bit working on music, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to take some of this time that I have and actually just commit to just generating a bunch of material that I can actually start.
It's time for your rock opera to come out.
Right, exactly. and it's like, it's just crazy, having been in like the controller and, software controller business for so long, and, hyping it and developing for that and making these things in ways that are useful for myself and useful for other people. Like I ended up turning to guitar, and like I sort of the genesis of this album was a lot of just like working with guitar, and that was part of like partly Livid's fault, because we did the guitar wing, and that started getting me back into guitar again. I was like, oh well, I need to dust off my guitars and start doing that again, because we have this guitar product, and but it's like I just kind of hold up with like some effects pedals and an iPhone and my guitar, and just started like using like a looper and just generating long, like 32 bar sections of just weirdness, and just doing that late at night, put the kid to bed, go play guitar for a while, and just like, generate all this material. And then just I took all that stuff and brought it to the DAW, and started using controllers on it, and doing a lot of software processes to just sort of like take that big lump of unlistenable loop, all stacked on top of each other, spread everything out, give everything air and space, and more processes and more effects. And yeah, but it was really kind of funny, because it was like, where did I end up? I ended up in the corner of a room playing guitar on an old iPhone, and it's like, this thing doesn't even act. It's just like basically an audio recorder at this point. It's not even something that, you talk on. So it is kind of like, it was kind of a cruel irony in some ways, but also very inspirational for me, like as a way to move forward. And,
I know that feeling completely, because there is just something about the guitar is just, it's full, ready to go, just the way it is. Like, especially if you pick up an acoustic guitar, it's just, there it is. It's the whole deal right there. There's no nonsense, and there's something really nice and immediate about it.
Yeah.
As soon as you have it there, and the fact that it's static the way it is, yet it's still so deep. There's so much to uncover and unpack and figure out. And I think it kind of almost helps me realize the depth of like some of the other stuff I have too, because like some of these like devices I've got sitting around me, I have like so many different options and layers and
Mm-hmm.
sounds and
Yeah.
capabilities, and you know, to see like just how deep the guitar goes, that it's kind of endlessly fascinating. It's inspiring. It brings me back to this world and with like a new like excitement.
Yes. Yeah. It is funny, like like as far as like sound sources and things like that, I'd really try to rely on, you know, I don't do sound packs. I don't do, preset packs. No offense. It's like, but I'm actually, like we release sound packs at Sensel, stuff that is designed for the Morph. So like we'll release like a live set, a Bitwig set, a Reason set, that's basically preset so that you can just like plug on your Morph and swap overlays and start jamming on it.
Mhm.
Um, but they're pretty stripped down. Like we're not like, I look at these sound packs and there's like 200 kicks. I'm just like, that just sounds like the worst.
Yeah, yeah.
That just sounds like a despair point. It doesn't sound inspirational at all.
That's a
But
funny point you make. Like the
yeah.
larger the download now for me, the like less I want it.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
oh my God, a gig of sound. No, get
Right.
that off my computer. Like, no way.
Right.
It's just too
Exactly.
much.
So it's like, with a guitar, I can, you can do so many things, like especially with like an E-bow and a distortion
Mm.
pedal, and you can do so many great things. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's
it,
the thing. I think like there's so many features we're packing in, and
yeah,
we've gotten so excited about like more and more features, but
yeah.
sometimes it's nice to just have something that does the one thing nice well.
Right.
And
And with the Morph, like in some ways it's, with Livid, we have a lot of controls and they all have LEDs, and that LED provides like a lot of like, a lot of controllers do that, push and the, Machina, and they have their displays and LEDs that provide a lot of user interface, a lot of feedback. With the Morph, you don't have any of that stuff. And it actually, again, it's like, it sort of simplifies the process. It's like, oh, this is about playing.
mhm.
I'm gonna play. And so it's like I can take last night I was preparing a sound set from one of our artists, Nate Hendricks, and he has, one of the things he did is just like, he has like a sax sample. He's a multi-instrumentalist, and he played just like this sax lick and put it on a drum on I'm sorry, not on like the piano overlay, just like, it's really the most, it's like, a sampling synthesizer from 20 years ago, where you have one sample and you play it with all 127 MIDI notes, right?
Right.
It's not a multi-sample thing, and it's funny because it's kind of a lick, but it's like I threw it on the Morph, and I used MPE to just sort of like use the pitch bend, so I could just sort of like use the piano overlay and just sort of like slide around it and stroke it, and put it at like a really high pitch, threw some flanger on it, and it's like, it's ridiculous. It's like, this is cool. It's
Mhm.
just like a totally different thing. And it's just taking this really simple, saxophone lick and just applying some different gesture to it, and I didn't need a bunch of information.
Yeah.
If you go to SoundCloud / Slambassador, the first track, because I just uploaded it this morning, you can hear some of that.
That was
And
Slambassador.
yeah, that's my old
That's
moniker,
cool.
that I had for a long. It's maintained on SoundCloud, but nowhere else. SLAMBASSADOR. Uh,
Cool. I like that.
and yeah, so it's just like taking these sort of simple things, and it's like, I don't need a sound pack with a bunch
Mhm.
of reverse cymbals in it, and just it's just too much. I just want like a few key elements and just like start to play. Um, it's funny you mentioned the acoustic guitar. I actually bought an acoustic guitar about I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. And again, because like I was like, I have this shed in my backyard. There's my office. Um, when I'm in, when it's like the Sunday afternoon, and I'm in the house, and my kids messing around, and it's like, I don't go out to the shed to fire up everything. And so I was like, I just need something to like plink around on. I got an acoustic
Mm.
guitar, and it's like, oh man, this is again, like, oh, this is so rich.
Mhm.
Like, there's so many cool things you can do with it. And I've got like chord charts, and it's like learning more about melody and stuff like that, bringing that back into the studio, and so I'm like, okay, here's some chords, that spaces I can navigate. These are going to be my note tables for the analog synth. I like it's sort of like, okay, this is what I learned from the acoustic guitar. I'm going to bring that in and apply it to something totally different.
Yeah, the acoustic guitar prevents you from tinkering around with like presets or tones and all these kinds of things that I think distract us from actually making music. And
Yeah,
the piano's the same way. I mean,
right.
it is what it is, and you just play it, and you're not thinking about, "Well, maybe I should change the timbre, maybe I should, put a filter on this." It's no, it's just play it, just explore music that way instead of exploring all the other parts of sound.
Well, you focus on the old school things of like song structure, and you focus
Yeah.
on melody and harmony, and which are things that have always been really secondary in my interests. Techno, a lot of this, techno music just does not care about that stuff. It's about you know, sort of, it's more about like a state of mind um than about telling a
Mm.
story. It's a journey, not a story, I guess is a way to put it. And when you start playing around with like the acoustic guitar, like I'm not looking to be a singer-songwriter. It's just like it's nice to be able to be like, oh yeah, there is all this, and I'm sure there's some singer-songwriter out there who's just going like, well, of course, dude. It's like, but there's like, oh, there's all these other things about music. It's like, how could, you
Yeah.
know, how are these things applicable? How can they be influential? How can they be inspiring?
Yeah, your comment, of course, dude, it kind of makes me think like sometimes switching, all the switching I do between whether it's electronic or acoustic playing, sometimes it just reminds you of the basic obvious thing,
Hmm.
like that just, oh yeah, like you gotta like have a melody, you know,
Yeah,
you got
yeah.
like that's important. And, or as when you go into like the electronic world, it reminds you of like things of different tones and things that you're not really thinking about as much when you're playing an acoustic guitar.
That's true, but I'm not a very good guitarist. So when I'm playing acoustic guitar, there's all sorts of timbral accidents that happen in the course of it, and I'm just like, oh man, what I'm like, I need to bring it out. I'm like, I need to bring my acoustic into the shed and start recording some of these things, because there are just like, this the squeak. The guitar I have has kind of an obnoxious squeak to it. And the But then there's just like when I'm changing chords, or I like hit a string wrong, and it just sort of like it's damped in one place in a weird way
Mm,
because I'm not very facile, and then the string just makes this odd tone, and it has this really strange sort of attack and rattle to it. It's just
mm,
like, oh, really wonderful timbral spaces within that.
yeah.
And
I
so it
miss
is
some
funny
of
'cause-
that stuff in like electronic music when I play keys or something or playing like sounds I make, or I miss some of like the noise and weird things. And
Mhm.
if you ever used like a MIDI pickup for a guitar, you realize like all the different sounds you're getting because it's interpreting those squeaks as like a really high note and a really low note and all these like crazy weird in between things that happen.
Mhm.
And you really notice like that the fluidity between the notes even, whereas sometimes you're not right on pitch and it 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 interprets that as like 7 different half step movements and
Yes.
it's just one note.
Yeah, you really have to adjust your playing to the MIDI interpreter, to the computer,
Yeah.
and or the firmware or whatever. And it is pretty remarkable. Like, I don't know if you ever listened to John McLaughlin in the '90s, um, the guitarist. He started with Miles Davis back in the '60s, and then went on to find, he did the Great Mahavishnu Orchestra, where it was like this super prog jazz fusion stuff. In the '90s, he had this really great band. It was a trio. It was Kaya Card on the bass and Trilot Gertu on percussion drums. And John McLaughlin was playing, like, he'd play guitar, but he was also doing a lot of guitar synth stuff.
Mm.
And and I look back on that, and I'm like, it sounded good. Um, and that guy has so just crazy chops. He's a guitar hero, and I'm just amazed that he was able to uh, not have the guitar MIDI stuff just sound terrible. He had that stuff. I mean, obviously he got all the best support, but even so, it was, the mid 90s.
Yeah,
Like it
yeah.
wasn't that good.
Right.
This stuff, this stuff just was
It's
not
still
that good
hard.
yet.
It's
Yeah.
I
I
mean, I
mean,
still
well,
find it difficult.
yeah, but if you use like something like the Antares, um, what is it? The Antares hardware, like what is it? I forget what they call it, but it's like it's a guitar thing that can repitch and retune that thing is just like it's totally transparent.
Hmm.
That thing is
I
really
haven't seen
dialed
that.
in. It's pretty impressive. Um, but but yeah, the stuff that John McLaughlin was doing is just like he got that stuff dialed in, and I'm sure he had to adapt his playing a lot in order to get that stuff to behave well.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say I gotta listen to that. But I know from my own experience, I have a MIDI pickup for my guitar. It's polyphonic. It's amazing,
Which
honestly.
is it? The triple play Fishman?
Yes, it's a triple play. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I was struggling to remember.
I got a taste of that a little bit not long ago, and I was like, "Ooh, this is pretty interesting."
It's incredible, but you've really gotta like pay attention to how you're playing, and
Mm-hmm.
like I said, like finger squeaks get interpreted. Everything gets interpreted, and like even if you kind of slide into a note or you bend it a little bit while you're
Mm-hmm.
playing, like all the
Yeah.
little subtle things you do with guitar, even like maybe a little pick scratching,
Yeah.
just muted pick scratching like that
Yeah.
you just kind of do normally in your strumming, all gets picked up and like it tries to spit out some notes, and you got to play so much cleaner.
Yes.
It's like playing a different instrument.
Yeah. It's funny. That's one of the things I've thought about is like I would like to use that as a sort of like just note input device, to
Mhm.
be able to just like take sort of create note tables out of it, and it's sort of like a Baroque way to do it. But it seems like it would be great to just be able to like play stuff and just get a nice batch of MIDI that is, then that you can then apply to different instruments and just sort of break it up. I've always been, yeah. How do you end up using it? Do you use it as sort of like a lead instrument, or do you?
I've done a little bit of that. You can play chords. It's polyphonic. It's
Yes.
also what's also really nice is it's wireless. So there's not that extra wire.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you look like you're faking it because your guitar is not even plugged into anything. You don't have anything in the jack even, because it transmits from the
Right.
pickup itself to like a USB dongle.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it looks like you're faking it. But yeah, if when I use it, it changes the way I play. So it's more like strumming a chord. It's not like a single strum, like a big chord.
Mm-hmm.
And not so
Yeah.
much like a strum pattern. That's gonna be kind of weird. But playing melodies can be nice.
Yeah.
And I think, at least my approach, I kind of understand I'm not playing guitar and I'm not playing a synth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even if I'm using a synth sound, I'm not playing like a keyboard. So I'm
Yeah.
kind of like letting it be its own thing a little bit, and
Uh-huh.
maybe not trying to have as much control over what I'm getting.
Yeah.
If you know what I'm saying, like
Right.
it's somewhere in the middle, and it's
Yeah.
kind of interesting that way. And it's just what I like about it is it just makes you think about music differently and play differently, and it makes you play your guitar differently. It makes you play with your synthesizer instruments differently, and it's just a fresh perspective.
Yeah, it is funny because like when I've played with those things, and of course, it's like you can turn your guitar into a piano. Like I don't know why I'd want to do that, but okay, I'll go with that. And you start playing like a marimba sound or a piano sound, and it's just like you're playing guitar, and that's the sound that's coming out. It's like this is weird,
Yeah.
and for whatever reason, like when you're playing with like MPC pads or or even just a cheap MIDI keyboard that's a piano. I don't have that same sort of uncanny feeling
Uh-huh.
that I get with guitar MIDI stuff. And part of it is the novelty, I'm sure, but I'm more than happy to play a keyboard and get a sax sound out of it. Um, or play like a 4x4 pad and get marimba sounds or whatever. It's like it just doesn't. I'm sure it's a lot because I'm sure people when they first played like a synthesizer keyboard and it didn't sound like a piano, it was probably pretty weird.
Yeah, but I guess maybe we're
But I
used to
know,
that.
yeah,
But it is
yeah,
weird, like because when you play the guitar, though, you still hear your guitar string.
right,
So if
yes,
I'm
and
playing
you feel it
yeah,
too.
you feel it, you hear it, and so if I'm playing, say, like a string sound that has a long attack, I'm hearing like my little pluck of my electric guitar string, ding, and then like the swell comes in. So there's this funny, like opposite almost, like the envelope of the sound of the volume is opposite of what you're hearing, and
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you're feeling, because you're right, because you feel the vibration of the strings,
Hmm.
where you don't feel that on a MIDI keyboard.
Right.
So it's weird. It's kind of like the world's flipped upside down a little bit for you. But that's where I think the fun comes, and where you kind of wind up doing things you wouldn't normally do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fairly practical, but there's also like a novelty to it for
Yes.
me.
Yeah.
Um yeah, so it's cool. My hope of what it would be is I just play my guitar normal and I get all these sounds, but I don't think it'll ever be that. I
Right.
just think the nature
I
of the guitar is not going to ever get there. I don't think it's even the software interpreting it. I think it's the guitar. It makes so many noises when you play it, and it's just its own instrument.
Yeah, it's the electric guitar, and it's funny. I did a talk many years ago when we first did the guitar wing. Um, I did a talk at a Decibel Festival up in Seattle
Mm.
because they always had like a small conference thing, and my whole my sort of my the premise for that talk was making the electric guitar electronic, which is which is just
That's funny.
a couple letters different, but it's like it's like totally different approach, because it's like the electric guitar is the sort of the self-contained thing, and all the electricity is uh coming from the wall, and and your guitar pedals, and it's all sort of like all the processes through those quarter-inch cables. And my premise was like, well, let's make it more electronic, as in electronic music, and sort of like how can the guitar sort of be uh how do we think of it as a synthesizer? How can we take its input and bring it into a DAW and into software, and then sort of think of it as the same way that you would think of a synthesizer, and start giving it those same treatments where you have modulators and you have
Mm.
your different effects, and the way you'd sort of like you treat the sounds, the way you would use the sounds within the process of a composition or whatever. And it's like it's the same thing, but you apply these different sort of mentalities to it, and you get very different results. Because then it's like, oh, it's a timbral thing I can use in a techno track, or and so you can create these swells and stuff. And I was doing things like I did a thing where I was like, well, we can even use like sort of like use synthesis in live. I think I used some of the physical modeling stuff to sort of create a drum set with the guitar. So you'd have like split like the high and low frequencies, and the lower frequencies would trigger sort of a kick drum sound, and the higher frequencies, and it was all like processed sound. It wasn't MIDI triggering, and it was just kind of like a fun idea. It wasn't again, it was more of a philosophy rather than a practicality. But it was kind of like that was one of those things that what I was just starting to get back into guitar, and it was like, this is what I need to do. This is how I need to think. This is great.
Right.
I'm going to listen to my own talk.
Well, I think sometimes, and I've learned this on the podcast here, talking to people, and some of the episodes I do just by myself, is I do a lot of my thinking on it, talking, just, as it's coming out of you. And even sometimes when I'm doing lessons with students on music production stuff, I'm kind of like figuring out things and learning things as I'm talking about it. It's like a way we sort out our thoughts, I think, just
Right.
by kind of letting our mind go and talk in the stream of consciousness, and then you kind of uncover things.
So your students are sitting there thinking you're delivering gospel, and you're just like, you're like, I'm figuring this out just like you are.
I'm very clear about that, especially with the kids I teach in high school. I teach high school English, so I'm very transparent with that. I'm like, listen, you know, I'm winging it. Life, I'm winging it. And we're all winging it. Really, it was always like I think a real surprise when you're growing up and all the adults in your life that have been telling you what to do and how to live and giving you advice. Even, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean like from a
No, I
good
know.
place. When you
Yeah.
when you realize that, like, hey, wait a minute. You don't know what
Well,
you're doing. Like, you're winging it. You're like, I think it's an important thing for kids to just know that we don't know the answer to anything. We're just doing the best we can with what we've learned and our experience. But you know, take it with a grain of salt, I guess. There is something to be said about experience, but don't forget, like, no one has the answer book in life
right.
and things.
Right.
We're kind of just taking stabs in the dark too.
Yeah, it is funny. Like when I first, my kid is closing in on 6 years old, and a friend of mine, he had a kid right around the same time, and we were both like, when their kids were infants, he's just like, we were talking about it. We're just like, it is, people have been raising kids for as long as people have existed, right?
Hmm.
And it's like you get an infant, and why is there still so much like doubt and insecurity? Like, how is this not understood?
Right.
How is this,
We,
why is this still a problem?
yeah, we didn't figure this out yet. Like, we don't have
Right.
the roadmap. Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of there's a lack of good information about all of it. And even when you do get good information, like there's a certain point where you're like, well, is this good information? And there's a lot of certainty about parenting that I think is really just a way to make ourselves feel better, but it's not necessarily based on anything like based on any good data.
Yeah, and it's funny when you like sometimes you take something that works fine most of the time and just change it completely, and then it works better, and you just don't know with so many things.
Yep,
I don't have
that is for
kids, but I
sure.
mean, like, in just my experiences in general, like, sometimes, the conventional wisdom is just it's good, but sometimes it's not, and sometimes it
Yeah.
needs to be challenged.
Yep, for sure. All right. So, we should probably wrap up. We're at an
Yeah,
hour, a little bit over an hour, I
that
think.
sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, so of course, I'm so thankful that you've taken the time to do this. And uh, when you've got like a nice little blog going on the Sensel site too, right?
Yep.
Where people can follow the news of what's going on with the company and the products. And one of the nice new things that just came out for me, especially, was you guys released the Ableton Live MIDI remote script
Yes.
that
Yeah.
kind of gives the Morph a little more integration where it gets recognized by live, and then, like, you get like that rectangle box, which I'm
Yeah. You get
blanking
your
on the name of.
session view.
Yeah, so it follows
Yeah.
like your clips and stuff.
Yeah. It's not a crazy amount of control, but it's just like the basics. Like you
No,
can
it's what
switch,
it needs. Yeah.
yeah, you can switch tracks easily. You got some send control. You've got your transport control, which is, it's kind of funny because it's like, well, you can MIDI learn that. Well, it's funny because like we set it up out of the box. Like the transport controls are just MMC. So when you hook it up to Logic, the transport controls on the overlays just work. But in live, of course, it doesn't respect that. So, it's like, okay, well, we're gonna have to do a script for this. But yeah, you can just get around. You have like a shift control, so you can fire clips as well as play drums and stuff like that. So it's pretty fun. It's just a little bit tighter integration.
Yeah, the
We're
shift is that's pretty smooth how you guys did that. I like that.
cool. Yeah, and then
Kind
we're
of
also
doubles
working on
the
a
whole functionality.
right without it being like overwhelming or
Hmm.
you can use it if you want to, and it's just not going to get in the way. And we also have the same thing coming out for Bitwig. It's going to be a very similar script.
Nice.
To give you like the same sort of functionality.
So you can kind of just plug it in and it's recognized and you're ready to go.
Yep, absolutely. And you can start jamming on and stuff because you can create clips and you can sort of like record into clips and overdub onto clips and things like that. So it's just a little bit more transparent, a little bit more integrated into the DAW.
Yeah, that's nice. Do you guys have any future plans you can talk about? Anything on the horizon we should look out for, or
Well, it's a living instrument,
yeah.
so we're always, we have some video profiles that are coming out about some people and places that are pretty interesting. We also, of course, we always have like lots of different sound packs and things that are, they're cool for the Morph, but they're cool for anything. So
Mhm.
if you just like sound packs for live and quick templates for getting up and running, we always have that stuff. The overlay designer is a great test bed for future overlays. So, we always like to try to encourage people to get that stuff up on the forum and the type of, weird little interfaces they're working on and what they want to see from it. But yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think there's going to be a lot more projects that that we're going to be, there's going to be a lot of projects that you're going to see that sort of are always going to be like, wait, you can do that with the Morph.
No, that's
So,
cool.
I mean, even if you look at our blog right now, it's like one of the projects is a DMX controller with an Arduino, which is very different from a piano keyboard for Ableton Live. So, yeah, it's a pretty rich device, that is for sure.
Yeah, I guess. And the editor makes it so customizable. I mean, you can really. What's cool about it is you got like, say, your music production layout with the 16 pads, and then there's a little keyboard, but you can override all of that stuff.
Yep.
And you also have the
Yeah.
option now with that MIDI remote script for live that it just kind of hooks up and works, and it's
Yeah.
sort of automatic, which is cool. So I think it's a really cool product, especially like if you want to travel light, and still have a lot of options. That's always sort of the trade-off. You might get a little something small to work with, but then you're stuck with that thing. But the overlays are great. I mean, you can switch between them mid song, mid everything. Like, it's instant.
Yeah.
As soon as you put that next one down, it's recognized and it goes right back to your programmed mappings and stuff that you've set up. So it's really, really flexible, and I think it's really cool for travel. So like when I use it mostly actually when I'm not at home. So
Oh yeah.
it's nice just to have something that's that easy to set up and throw down and just good to go.
Yeah. Well, I think, like I said, it's a living instrument. There's always going to be a lot of interesting things that come up with it, and new use cases for not just music, but for other creative applications too. So, yeah, just people keep in touch. Check it out. It's a fun project. There's a lot of life in it.
Cool. So we'll send them to sensel.com, sensel.com.
Yep.
And Peter Nyboer, thank you so much.
Brian, thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate everything. It's been great, bouncing back and forth with you and emails and all that stuff. And I appreciate you guys supporting my work. And I'm really happy to see this all taken off. It's really a cool product.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please make sure you go check out sensel.com. Really cool device, as you've heard now for the last hour and a half.
Among other things.
Yeah, but I mean, hey, you know what? Even if you go to the site to pick up some of the sound packs, you can still use those too. So it's worth it. Definitely a lot of cool stuff going on there.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care, everybody.